there are some times where conflict happens where it takes a long time to resolve it. And there are some conflicts that never really get resolved, which is unfortunate, but that's called a stalemate, right? Welcome back to another episode. I'm Dr. Maisha, and as always, I'm grateful to be with you here for another episode of the podcast. I want to start out just by thanking you all as listeners. It means so much to me that you come back week after week and listen to the podcast. For those of you who share, I know that there are listeners who come to me who tell me that they've shared it with their friends, their family member, their colleagues, organizations, and I very much appreciate that as well. We want this podcast to grow. We want this message to get out to the world. So I appreciate and also ask that you continue to share, you continue to listen, to subscribe. And also, if you enjoy this podcast, one of the things that really helps, it helps for Apple Podcasts, it helps for Spotify, it helps for the platforms to see reviews. So if you enjoy the podcast, go ahead and place your 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast platforms so that Apple knows that this is a podcast that they should serve up to people to bring valuable content, valuable information, valuable lessons and learnings and messaging. So I would very much appreciate if you continue to share, but also if you go ahead and leave us a review and let the people know coming after you the valuable information that you are getting from this podcast. With that, today I want to talk a little bit about giving grace and opening conversations. About a month ago, I went to Japan with my family, and the things that happened, I went with a friend of mine who's a good girlfriend of mine who actually has been on this podcast. Shout out to Ashanda. She is a close friend as well. She's my financial coach, but she's also a close friend, and she's affectionately known by my son as Cupcake Auntie. And so this was the first time that she and I have traveled together. And of course, what a risk we took to travel all the way across the world together on our first trip together. And so before we traveled, we sat down and we had conversation about what are our travel styles? What is it that we need to be able to take care of ourselves on these trips? What are our travel personalities? And we established that before we left. When we went over, then we understood one another. But as what happens when you are traveling with people, sometimes things don't go as planned. Sometimes things happen that you disagree around, or maybe tensions arise, or maybe plans get changed. And so, one of the things that happened while we were on the trip is that I maybe overscheduled the trip just a little bit. And inside of that, my travel partner needed to pull back some. And there were some times where I wanted to do something one way and she wanted to do something another way. And we came to a compromise, but we could sense that tension. We could feel that tension. Now, the thing about us is that we understand one another, we understand our dynamics. And she's also an amazing communicator. And so we also know to give each other space to work through whatever emotions that we're going through. So we go through the trip, we have a good time, we take space where we need to take space. But I think we both knew, I knew for myself that we were going to need to debrief. And I thought we would debrief once we returned. But on the last day of our trip, after breakfast, we were sitting there and Ashanda brought forth this conversation. I think she did it in the most masterful way. So I can't remember exactly how the question was, but it was along the lines of, what do you think about how the trip went and how we were on the trip? And it was a wonderful way to open the conversation to, there were moments of tension and there were moments of edge and maybe moments of disappointment. And one of the themes that really showed up inside of the tension that we felt, even though there was never any verbal altercation or verbal conflict that arose, what did arise was that underlying tension and the emotions associated with it. She had emotions and I had emotions. But one of the things that came up that we discussed was that grace. We had the conversation before about what we needed in our vacations. We had the conversation before, set the precedent of when I am this way, the best way to handle me is. And I also had the awareness that when my emotions arise, that before I speak, I need to self evaluate. What am I really upset about? What am I really sad about? What am I really disappointed about? Even with my travel partner, what she shared is that she was doing a similar thing, as she was giving me space. She was reflecting on her own and what she was experiencing and sitting with that. And inside of that, we gave each other space and we in turn gave each other grace. And it was a thing I think that carried us through the trip and allowed us to continue to be with each other and set aside whatever that was and have fun when it was time to have fun, and take space when it was time to take space. And so at the table that morning for breakfast, we had a wonderful discussion about the parts of the vacation that we enjoyed, the parts of the vacation that could have gone better, the areas between us where she decided that she needed to take some space during a time where I felt like I really wanted her to be with us, and how I felt about that, and how she felt about my reaction and response to that, which was to pull away a little bit and to be internal, which is something that I do when I'm close quarters with people, so that I give that space. And at the end of the day, what it came down to was an acknowledgement, a deep acknowledgement of our friendship, and a deep acknowledgement of the wonderful way that we were able to handle the situation. And so, the reason I share this is because oftentimes when conflict arises, and especially when that conflict is between two people who are close, or when it's a situation where you can't necessarily take space for days at a time, it is so important for us to regulate ourselves. I often talk about this concept of emotional intelligence and accessing our innate emotional intelligence. Part of that is being able to recognize when we have the emotion present, right? We recognize and we take that space. We honor the feeling that may be coming up in our body, the emotion that may be coming up with our body. We honor that feeling, but we take space to reflect on that. When we recognize something's going on, we take that space to reflect. And we also, especially when there's disagreement, even if that disagreement has not become verbal, even if it's just the tension of the disagreement, we make sure that we maintain respectful interaction and we maintain respectful discourse. And I think that is so important, because it then allows both parties to sit back and reflect and sit in and then come to the table in a very trauma informed but a very graceful manner. All right. And that's not to say that conflict always has to look pretty. It doesn't, right? Sometimes conflict will look intense, it may look ugly. And that's a whole other podcast. What happens when what do you do when that happens? That's when you come back and you mend the relationship. But in as much as you can, when you start to feel the rise in emotion, to be able to pause and step back and say, okay, what's really going on? What am I really feeling? It may present as anger, but if you dig a little deeper, what is it really? And for me, it was maybe a little sadness, maybe a little disappointment, right? And so when you're able to do that, is that having that emotional presence, or that presence to sit in the emotional awareness and sit through the various emotions that may be coming up and move through the why. What are the thoughts underneath that? And to work through that will then give us the space to name it, to acknowledge it, to honor it, to adapt to the circumstances so that we can, to regulate so that we can adapt to the circumstances that we're in and move through them with equanimity, right? With ease. And then when the timing is right, to come to the table with conversation, with courageous conversation. And that's exactly what happened. We were able to recognize and reflect. We were able to maintain that respect. We were able to sit with our emotional awareness. We were able to model and mirror the behaviors that we needed for each other, right? So that we could continue to have fun, like really not let our feelings get in the way of our fun. And that we did very well with, right? And it takes two. It wasn't just me, it was her, right? It takes two people with that kind of awareness. And we modeled and mirrored to each other what we needed and what we wanted to see, such that we knew we're okay. We're okay. There's a little tension, but we're okay, right? And then when the timing was right, we adapted throughout the whole process. We adapted to whatever we needed to adapt. We adapted the trip. We adapted our self time. We adapted all of that so that we were taking care of ourselves. And then that last piece was acknowledgement and repair, right? What we needed to mend, we mended what we needed to mend, which wasn't a lot for us in the moment, but that was part of it, right? Acknowledging and having the courage to really tell the truth about what we were feeling, right? And what was going on. And we can do that because we practice in our own worlds. Remember, practicing progress over perfection. We didn't expect for the conversation to be perfect. We just kept the conversation open. And and by giving each other grace and by going through and utilizing, when you might recognize as I talk about the remap framework, we were actually operating inside of that. And so as we took all of those steps, we were able to come to the table, we were able to acknowledge what happened, and we were able to restore and even deepen the closeness, deepen the connection of our friendship. And that's what happens when you give grace and when you keep conversations open, whether it be in your personal relationships, whether it be in your work relationships. And that's happened in several of my relationships with work, in consulting relationships, in business relationships, where we have given grace, kept conversations open, and been able to acknowledge and move things forward in a way that preserves our relationship. And I think that in a lot of times, that is the goal. How do we preserve and restore the closeness or the connection inside of relationships when there's conflict? Now, that doesn't presuppose that there are some relationships that need to be completed. There are some times where conflict happens where it takes a long time to resolve it. And there are some conflicts that never really get resolved, which is unfortunate, but that's called a stalemate, right? When neither parties can really come to an agreement. But if you can't come to an agreement, the one thing you can come to is completion. And so, in some cases, there may be relationships, work relationships, there may be personal relationships where completion is what will resolve the conflict or the situation rather than restoring the connection itself, right? Sometimes we have to restore the connection to ourselves more than anything else, okay? However, in the most cases, when we really do want to restore that connection and that intimacy, deepen that intimacy, what we want to do, or restore workability. Just like we're talking about personal relationships, but in work relationships and organizations, a lot of times this is to restore workability, to restore collaboration. This same type of framework works to restore workability in our work relationships and collaboration and team cohesiveness. So at the end of the day, when we want to do that, part of it is giving grace. Part of it is that pulling back to reflect, right? Once we recognize that something's going on and sitting in our emotional awareness. Part of it is coming with respect and courage and acknowledgement and modeling and mirroring the behaviors we want to see. And really Overall, it's practice. All right. So, where are the areas in life where you can begin to give grace and open conversations where there may be tension, where there may be disagreement? Where can you bring that recognition, that reflection, that respect? Where can you bring that emotional awareness and courage? Where can you bring the mirroring, the modeling so that you can mend? Where can you bring the adaptability and the accountability and the acknowledgement? And that's the other thing that happened. I didn't mention the accountability, but we each took accountability for our own behaviors, our own emotions. We didn't blame, we didn't point fingers. We each took our own accountability, right? So, where can you bring that accountability and that acknowledgement? And when can you begin to really practice? Because practicing makes progress rather than perfection. All right. Love to hear from you. And again, share this episode with a friend, a family member, a colleague, because this is information, this is data that can be very valuable to those who are dealing with tensions in their own life, tensions in their own relationships in various areas of their life. And once again, I ask and I invite and I very much appreciate is leaving a 5-star review so that not only other people know that this is value, but also that the platform knows that this is valuable and they will begin to serve up these conversations more and more to the people who really, truly need them. All right. So, with that, I again thank you for listening to this episode, to the podcast, for subscribing, for being a loyal listener. And until the next time we see you, please stay empowered.